Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce you guys into the L9 Productions. We're doing a dig with Patriot Rabbit Holes, and they have come up with some information, and a gentleman here that I'm going to allow him to introduce himself here in a second about some very interesting information. Why don't you go ahead and give us a little history about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Eliahi Priest. My friends call me El. I took that name in my early 20s after the death of my little baby boy. It's an old Hebrew name that means father, so it was a bit of a coping mechanism. My birth name is, of course, Pete Priest. I've kept that surname, and the reason why I've been very, very clear is that obviously I'm here today to talk about a drop, an intel drop that we're doing on 8chan. In folder 0, everyone will be able to actually see my credentials, my passport, my driver's license, all of that. And obviously it's still going by my birth name. But as you can see, I look exactly the same. Yeah, so a little bit of an introduction. I'm, as I said, grateful to be on the channel today, on the service. And thanks to a number of people who have helped put this together. I'm just an everyday Aussie guy. Well, I was. And I was interested in Nikola Tesla's technology. So really started to explore that in my early 20s. That basically led me to the Institute for Security and Cooperation in Outer Space when I lived in Scotland in the UK for 6 years, and I was the UK director of the Institute for Security and Cooperation in Outer Space. We had that was set up by Dr. Carol Sue Rosen, who was a witness in the Disclosure Project, which some of your viewers will know quite well. And she was a protege of Dr. Werner von Braun, who was brought over in Operation Paperclip to the US. And von Braun was one of the fathers of the Apollo space missions because he was basically a rocket scientist. We had Sir Arthur C. Clarke as our honorary chair before he passed away. He was a pretty prolific author and responsible for geostationary orbits. And we had Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was an astronaut and responsible for the longest alleged moonwalk. So it was quite a bunch of luminaries, and off the back of that, I was invited to speak at the World Peace Congress, which was UN mandated in 2008, where I announced a number of solutions, including the financing of operational zero-point technology. And through that, I went down a number of rabbit holes in the finance sector, where I stumbled across what's called the collateral accounts, and it's those accounts that I'm here to talk to you about today.
So give us a good solid answer of, because we got to question everything. Why should we believe you?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And I don't ask anyone to believe me on faith or faith alone. Everything I tell you guys about today can be backed up and verified by third-party documentation. And one of the key bits of documentation I have about the collateral accounts, which were set up, which were used by an organization called the 5-Star Trust, which were CIA guys. The FBI document I have, which is in the drop in folder 3 in key documents, and then within that folder, in a folder called classified government releases. That FBI document was an investigation for then Senator Edward Kennedy by the FBI, and it basically details the 5-Star Trust, which essentially was 5 men: George Bush Sr., William Colby, Edward Lansdale, Richard Armitage, and Lieutenant Colonel Ferreira, who later became General Lorin William Rosier. And these men were tasked to find a way to finance the CIA without it having to go to Congress to seek congressional approval for its activities, so it could remain more covert. And this was the deep state that President Kennedy was talking about before he was assassinated, I believe. And anyway, long story short, I came across this document because of my work with Lord David James of Blackheath. And in that folder, there are recorded phone calls of me and Lord Blackheath, as well as recorded phone calls of me and various members of the CIA. You can recognize my voice quite easily in those. And so everything I tell you today is 100% verifiable in the coming drop on Friday night, California time, which will be dropped on 8chan. So I certainly will not be telling you anything that can't be cross-referenced, cross-verified, and 100% checked out. And finally, it would be pretty stupid to be lying about this, given the fact that I risk an immense amount to my personal safety, my career, and my momentum going forward, given the fact that my enemy is the United States Central Intelligence Agency, and I'm being very public about this.
So, out of all the information that you're going to give us here and all the drops you're going to drop us here tomorrow on 8chan, what's the most important thing you want us to focus on?
That's fantastic. Great question, because as you can see, there are 13 folders. Some of those folders are exponentially full. But folder 3, which is key documents, and within that classified government releases and those surrounding folders, you then also have within folder 3 the accounts. Now, the accounts are crucial because this is what made me really engage into this. In 2009, we were told by Lord David James of Blackheath that 15 trillion was swifted from the Federal Reserve Bank to JP Morgan in the United States, and then across the ocean to, RBS Global, which is the Royal Bank of Scotland. We have one SWIFT note there valued at $5 trillion. So that shows this off-balance banking, as I like to call it. We have two separate economies in the world. We have the on-balance economy, which includes the GDPs and the central banks, and then we have an off-balance black market, which is exponentially larger than the global on-balance economy. And that black market just basically was so swollen by an unregulated, unaccountable drug trafficking, laundering economy within the banking infrastructure, that this $5 trillion is a real key piece. And I would remind everyone that Lord David James of Blackheath was given his lordship by Sir John Scarlett, or at least he was nominated for it. And Sir John Scarlett is the former boss of MI6. Lord James is considered one of the most successful unofficial agents of MI6, which is the British Secret Intelligence Service, as in James Bond. In UK history, because of his forensic financial due diligence on a number of their cases. So he's a very smart man, and he's certainly not taken in or gullible, given the fact that his track record is saving the Millennium Dome, which is this massive piece of entertainment architecture in London. He was the one that saved that from financial collapse, and he works directly with one of the heads of the London bank there. So he's a solid guy, and he gave me this documentation, and we've been discussing it. And this is a key piece, in 2011 when we were investigating it together, we were told 6 weeks before the media announced it that President Barack Obama, then president, was meeting then Prime Minister David Cameron, and that ended up eventuating on the exact date that Marlon McCall, whose US visa is found in the CIA documents, that we knew they were meeting. We knew they were meeting over this subject. The next morning, Lord James is called into an urgent meeting with Lord Strathclyde, who at the time was the boss of the House of Lords, and he was told to cease and desist his investigation, that he was making an embarrassment of the UK, and that if he continued to interfere in this investigation, that he was then interfering with the highest level of British security since World War II. And these were words directly out of Strathclyde's mouth. And they went to Lord James, and he called me. So this isn't anything I've read off the internet. This is information I've learned because I was directly involved in these operations, because of my interest in using these funds for earth restoration, zero-point energy, and technology like that in Africa.
So before I open up the floor to the other guys here, so the information gets dropped, gets sent out. What do you expect for that to do, and how will it affect you?
That's a great question. I've been using a metaphor lately that I know that we have all of the ingredients to bake the cake. I can say that's flour, that's eggs, that's milk, that's sugar. Okay, so I can verifiably and tangibly say that those ingredients are real. So the ingredients that I'm bringing forward, the witnesses, myself, the story, all of that's real. I'm not making it up, and I can prove it. However, because this has never been done before, and these ingredients obviously aren't eggs, milk, or sugar, I don't know when we stick this in the oven what it's going to turn out like. I couldn't tell you that because it's never been done before. I have an idea of what will happen, and I hope it will go very well. I hope it's going to get picked up by the mainstream community, and given the due diligence and the investigation that's required. Because when the documents, as I said, are verified, and you can see Lord David James making a speech about this very issue on YouTube in the House of Lords, you know, this is one of the most important investigations in the world today. Period. Because it represents a treason by one of the most powerful agencies in the US, and a former president of the United States, George Bush Sr., who's just hanging on to life, but he's still alive. And it involves all of the situation when former President Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas and allowing the cocaine planes to arrive in Arkansas under his watch. And that's how the Bushes and the Clintons became powerful together. It's very important. And so I would hope that patriots, through this network, actually take a close inspection of this information. Now, the second part of your question is, what do I expect to happen to me? Well, I expect to be engaged by the authorities who have a mandate of law, like the Australian government. And this is to finish one of your earlier questions, where should you look? The third most important folder is the prosecution folder. And I have taken considerable painstaking time, risk to my own liberty, to take this issue from everywhere from the local police of my area to the Australian Federal Police, to the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, ASIO, which is our domestic spying organisation, to ASIS, which is our foreign spying organisation. When they failed, to the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, Margaret Stone. When she failed, to the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, current, Turnbull and Julie Bishop. Turnbull might not be around much longer. When they failed, to the Attorney General, who's the boss of ASIO, but also the one with the mandate for the rule of law in Australia. And when he failed, to the Governor General, who sits right next to the Queen of England in terms of the Commonwealth and how that's structured in law. And not one agency, and I use an IP tracker called Yesware. I have literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. When I send an email to these people, they open it 70, 100 times. One email. And yet they never respond. So I can prove their engagement in a court of law, in the Supreme Court, in the High Court, in an international court, that the Australian government, rather than engaging with this information because it relates to Australia, because of the Nugan Hand Merchant Bank that was used to funnel the CIA money, came through Australia. And there was a subsequent, in the 80s, Royal Commission of Inquiry, which is basically your equivalent to a congressional hearing. And that Royal Commission of Inquiry could not find any relationship between Nugan Hand and the CIA or cocaine. And yet this information I'm dropping creates an absolutely irrefutable connection and relationship between Nugan Hand, the CIA, and cocaine. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's a cold case that was never solved. And I have proved that the entire Australian government, under the rule of law, has fallen before its own rule of law, and so it must be accountable to this investigation. And so I am awaiting a coherent dialogue from someone of some type of position of power to actually request a meeting with me so we can get stuck into this and root out these corrupt drug dealers from our society, which are using these funds to conduct and control the deep state, in my opinion.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the floor. I'd like to go and turn it over to Ardoc and see if he's got some questions.
Well, I'm definitely appreciate you spending the time with us, and you definitely have passion and drive to get to the bottom of this thing. Can you've been described in some videos as the Alex Jones of New South Wales, and I love that. Can you alluded a little bit about how you got involved. You talked a little bit about Scotland. Can you tell us specifically, was there something that the CIA asked you to do, or were you involved in some way with transferring funds or doing something that led you to understand the details of some of these transactions and maybe some other information?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Well, because I was waiting for these funds very naively, because, you know, I was involved, we all want to see the world change. And so I just thought, well, I'll try and create a network of people who have access to money and resources to help finance these projects, because we hear a lot of these inventors have great ideas and only $2.85 to rub together. So I thought, let's throw money at this technology. The same type of idea that Dr. Stephen Greer had, as much as I will qualify, I certainly don't agree with all of Dr. Stephen Greer's viewpoints and ideas that he's arrived at, but he has done a great deal to bring awareness to this type of technology that I was looking at financing. So I met some incredible people in Scotland who had overseas connections that were actually working very closely with a General Lorin William Rosier. And I came to learn about this General Lorin William Rosier. And the money never showed up, and the money never showed up, and the money never showed up. It was like chasing a rainbow with all of these promises, oh, the collateral, this is going to happen. And it really put me in a pretty difficult financial situation, because as a young entrepreneur, I was relying on these senior men to have accurate information and accurate deliverables, and it never showed up, and it never showed up. So there was a lot of stuff that happened during that time, but for the sake of clarity and brevity, I'll try and stick to some of the key points. Then I saw Lord David James come out on the news in an interview about this Foundation X that wanted to give this huge amount of money to the UK. And straight away, don't ask me how, my gut told me he was talking about the collateral accounts and those who were involved in the collateral accounts. So in 2011, I basically just looked up Lord James in the House of Lords and called his office. And his secretary put me through, and I had a 5-minute conversation with him. He was very dismissive, but polite. Oh, what do I need to talk to you for? You know, and I said, oh, you will want to talk to me, sir. It would just be a matter of time. How about I give you a call again in another week once you've hit your head up against a brick wall long enough? So I gave him a call in a week's time, and he said, oh, thank God you've called. You know, it's been disastrous. And I said, I told you. And from that, we struck up a friendship, an unlikely friendship, but a friendship nonetheless. He's a wonderful man. He is a white hat. He means well, and he wants to see the UK prosper, and he's not one of the, you know, the secret power players, so to speak, within our global government. But he had been reached out to by Foundation X, which turned out to be an organisation called the LWR Gotza Pure Heart Foundation. And when I heard those initials LWR, I knew it was Lorin William Rosier, who later I found out was actually Lieutenant Colonel Ferreira, reincarnated in another identity. And Ferreira was mentioned in the 5-star trust documents. So I began to put the pieces together. And, you know, that's how I came into this. Now, that matured because an agent by the name of M, who never identified himself, who said worked closely with General Rosier, contacted me. Or his assistant contacted me, and I had to go through all of these loopholes and encryption and end up installing this very unfamiliar encryption platform. And you'll hear those recordings. Those recordings are all in the drop. And so I'm speaking to this asset called M, who's the same asset that orders a hit on an asset by the name of White Cat that is cleared and signed off on by the DCI. Now, anyone who's familiar with military-industrial complex acronyms knows that the DCI is the Director of Central Intelligence. These people are very real people. At the time, the Director of Central Intelligence was Leon Panetta. So these individuals were prepared to kill over these accounts. And at one point I was told, M told me, that the DCI had informed Lord James and I that we were now interfering with or we're in breach of Protocol 4. Mate, I don't even know what Protocol 4 was. And I got frustrated at this point. This was before I knew about the hit, because I wouldn't have had anything to do with this had I have known about the hit prior. I basically just wound myself up and said, well, you know what? And I won't swear, but I did swear at the time. I said, the DCI, the only protocol I'm interested in is the one where this money is feeding hungry children. So you guys can just go and beep off. And that was that. I told the DCI where to go. I didn't contact them again. Before I uninstalled the software, I got back onto the platform and I found a recording that had accidentally been left on there. And that was the hit between M talking to this other unnamed guy organising a kill on an asset called White Cat. We think that might be Marlon McCall who they were organising a hit on, but we can't confirm that. All we can confirm is that they were, of course, CIA, and this was a real operation. So at the summit of my negotiations, trying to get some of this money for Earth restoration and zero-point research, I was negotiating very closely between the Director of Central Intelligence, the President of the United States, former President Barack Obama, and former Prime Minister David Cameron. I never spoke to any of them, but I was certainly speaking to people who were negotiating directly with them over this money. And that is how I came into this.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, if you got more questions, go for it, Ardoc.
I'm kind of scrambling through and pulling up some information. I do notice here in the United States, and maybe it may not be visible to folks in Australia and elsewhere, that there is a lot of FBI documents in regards to the 5-star trust, and there appears to be a blogger here in the U.S. that's been putting a lot of information about this out since 2012. I don't know if you've heard of a guy, but it's Rothschild, not Ernest Rothschild, R-A-U-T-H.
Yeah, I came across Ernest very briefly. I think his Facebook account was subsequently taken over by Africans. He disappeared off the face of the map. He's not a Rothschild. His original name was Ernest Bay, B-E-Y. And I don't know his full credentials, but he was at one point involved with the trust in some form or another. And I think they burned him, so he began to put documents out about it. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a complete FBI document chain that goes into a lot of detail about this. So the FBI was investigating this at some point in time. Whatever happened with the investigation, don't know. Do you have any information about that, or as to?
No, that's fine. I mean, before I really moved on this, I wanted to do my due diligence first as well. I wanted to first check whether it was an authentic FBI document. So I sent it to a friend of mine in Washington, who was a former advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon on energy-related matters. Her father is, considerably well known in Washington as well. Her husband is a military major in the U.S. Army. And because I know that Washington's very much a socialite type of capital of politicians, I asked if she knew anyone in the FBI, and she said she knew very senior people in the FBI. And I was welcome to share the document with her, and she took the document. I'd known this couple for many years, 4 or 5 years, and so, they're a genuine, very solid academic couple. And he has a pretty impressive, credentials as an Army major. So they were a good channel to go through. Anyway, she took it to the FBI, unofficially, of course. They confirmed that, yes, this was an authentic FBI document, and that it was real. She then came back to me, told me it was real. I spoke to Lord James, and he said, yes, that is the information I've received as well. And it's worthy to note that obviously Lord James, because of his background, has access to British intelligence as well. So we all know that we're talking about a real document. I think one of the reasons this has gone undisclosed for so long is because the implications in it are so staggering, and the people involved are so powerful that nobody bothered to tackle it. Well, I can say that I've spent 10 years of my life specifically on this issue since 2011. And since 2011, obviously I retired for a little bit when I came back to Australia. but formally the last 2 years working very, very hard on this subject, as you'll see in the prosecution folder, towards the Australian government. So we know that it's real. It's exciting that it's real, but it's very frustrating that basically our governments and our civil service agents and our agents of office have been too weak to do anything about it.
Great, thank you. Turn it over to somebody else who has some questions.
Thank you.
Maybe another question we can ask, because you had mentioned before that you had dropped this information before and it didn't seem to get much traction. Can you give us a little history of what happened the time before and the end result of why it didn't get the traction you were looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got my own Facebook personal page, and at the time it had about 3,000 or so, 3,500 friends on it. You know, these are just normal people. So I really didn't have the broadcast reach in terms of what I was doing on the internet to publicise it. My website was getting about 30 to 50 hits a day, or unique visits, that is. So that wasn't too bad. And I just don't think it was the right channel. And when I dropped this into the Australian government, I think it was more because of the security aspects and the fact that it's a highly inconvenient truth. I mean, really, what do you want to do? Do you want to listen to a country lad from Gunnedah, New South Wales, about political intelligence and geopolitics? Or do you want to maintain the status quo of one of your most important geopolitical and strategic military relationships on the planet, which of course is Australia's relationship through Five Eyes with the US government? You know, this is a highly inconvenient drop of information. So had I have just been sending emails to them and got no response, I would have clearly seen, maybe I would have stopped. But because I was using Yesware, which is a business marketing solution, an add-on that attaches to Gmail or Outlook, which basically tells you the IP address of the person opening your email, how many times they opened the email, their browser, their screen resolution, and all the basic information you get through cookies. So the long and short of that is, when I sent this to the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, their office opened it about 30 times in half an hour. Okay, once a minute for half an hour. One of the other emails I sent about this, which you'll see in that prosecution folder, it's been opened over 400 times by various different individuals within the Australian government. One of the most interesting emails I sent, because one of my whole strategies was decompartmentalisation, because one of the ways they maintain control is that within government departments, they operate in silos and they don't share information. So I thought if I could CC anyone from the local police to ASIO to the Attorney General and beyond, that I'd begin forcing dialogue. I'd begin forcing discussion in otherwise out with different security clearance zones. So that was my strategy, and that's why I hammered them with emails. At one point, I emailed the UK GCHQ, which is the intelligence arm of the MOD, the Ministry of Defence. So I emailed the Ministry of Defence, I emailed the White House, and I emailed the Prime Minister. That's fine. 3 weeks later, and this is forensic digital due diligence, 3 or 4 weeks later, I think it was, around that time period, that email opened again, which is fine. But the strange thing was, it opened in the UK. Within 5-10 minutes of each other opened in the UK, it opened at the White House, and it opened in Canberra, which is the headquarters of the Australian Parliament, where the Prime Minister is. So that showed that 3 weeks after that email was sent, I forced an international dialogue on this issue at the highest level. And that's what the IP tracking told me. So there has been massive implications to this geopolitically. They just haven't been public.
So can you give us a little history on how you came into contact with the people in this Discord, and what you felt was the best way to get the information out?
Yeah, great. Obviously, you know, it's a hard graft getting any information out. It's a very busy, very competitive marketplace for information. And with all due respect, most of the audience, I'm not suggesting your audience, but most mainstream audience would rather see a monkey sniffing another monkey's butt for 30 seconds and have a big laugh. You know, it's very hard reaching an audience with this type of information without a platform in place. So I was very thankful that I gave a speech, which is, I'd implore anyone to listen to, and we'll put a link in there from Vimeo onto the feed somewhere so people can find it. And basically I call it the Remembrance Day speech of 11th of November last year, when I basically stood up in front of the local war memorial and came public about this in the most concise, professional way that I could. You know, I wore a suit and the whole shebang. So it just turned out that another local source who lived nearby saw that, and because of the proximity, it was intriguing. And that local source happened to be on Discord. And so as a result of continued communication and the fact that she was able to see that I was a real person, you know, with a background in the Australian jewelry industry, and everything I said checks out, she introduced me to you guys, and here we are today.
Does anybody else want to ask any questions for him?
I've got one quick one. So a lot of this information has been leaked previously prior by either yourself or others, correct? And you're just kind of like connecting the dots again and hoping to gain a lot more traction, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you could say it's been leaked, but it hasn't really, because the places where it's been put have been highly, you know, obscure. So this has never really been given the credibility and the due diligence that it requires. So there's a few other people on the internet that tried to talk about it on some obscure blogs. And then I came forward with the Contact Zero website and a few YouTubes and a few channels. But really, my videos on this at most have had 20,000 views, 30,000 views at the most on Facebook. And Facebook is a very insulated community, as I think you guys know. So what we're doing is saying, well, look, at the end of the day, publicly, this hasn't gone out before internationally. This hasn't been given the due diligence required, and it certainly hasn't been cohesively explained the way that I can explain it because of my active participation in the actual operation at times. Certainly not the five-star trust cocaine trafficking, but certainly the negotiations with Lord James, General Rosia, and you know, others in the UK and from the US CIA. So what's a good metaphor I can use? It's like, okay, you just have a brand new Ferrari and you drive it into your driveway and you might show it off to your friends and family. You know, maybe the community catches word of it. Well, you could say that's a leak. Or you could have that Ferrari, you could drive it down the main street and some national and international press are there, and they take photos of it, do a bit of a write-up and filter it through the relevant distribution channels. Well, then you actually have a proper leak. So this information's gone out into the driveway and friends and family have seen it. This information has never been leaked publicly. No mainstream journalist ever has picked it up apart from Gary Webb, because look what happened to Gary Webb. He committed suicide with 2 bullets to the head.
Well, speaking of that, can you tell us what your biggest fear is?
I think, to be perfectly honest, I don't have one. That's why it's me doing it. I'm ready to take these idiots by the horn. They're just men and women. They're just human beings. You know, what are they going to do? They're going to put me in, what, a prison? What are they going to do? They're going to try and shoot me? You know what I mean? To me, that's archaic philosophy, and I've come this far. And I believe there's a reason for that. So, no, mate, I don't have any fear whatsoever. If I did, I wouldn't be doing this because I would be more cautious for my loved ones, my family. You know, I want to see this through. And short of someone committing a fraud or a crime against me, I'm going to see it through. That's what I'm here to do. Because this type of behaviour, you know, look at the injustice. When on the war on drugs, we sent millions of people maybe for an ounce of weed, maybe for just having a spliff, because then they'd done too many things. We sent them to jail. We tore apart lives. We tore apart the black community. And the very people who were sending them to jail were the very people bringing the drugs in. I mean, if that isn't the height of moral indecency, and the only way we can wrestle your US Constitution back and our Australian Constitution and the actual international rule of law away from the deep state is to actually have just, balanced, equal scales. And that means the real criminals who have been doing all of this stuff, creating wars, manipulating economies, creating false flags, and trafficking drugs, they need to go down. And we need to provide an amnesty for all of the poor people whose lives were destroyed by this CIA psyop. That's what I'm looking for. And I tell you what, that's what I'm going to get.
So is there anybody here that's dug into the information that would like to go ahead and ask some particular questions about the information he's going to be dropping?
And I finally got a chance to read a couple pages of the FBI files that were out there. One of the things that was raised in their reporting was that at that time they were questioning and noted that neither Helms or Daphne or Rothschild cartel had withdrawn the money from the Five Star Trust accounts, and they were questioning as to why and what was the purpose of that. It looks like this stuff is all over in coordination with Japan, New Zealand, and others, and it's very interesting stuff. Do you have any information that you can discuss with the viewers to kind of whet their appetite as to what the connection is there and why perhaps this money is still sitting there available?
Yeah, I think it's still sitting there available because to bring it all into the mainstream economy, you'd collapse the economy. It'd be akin to just printing too much money. You'd devalue and cause huge inflation just by having too much liquidity in the market. So they have to be very careful how they bring funds off balance and put them on balance. I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that, and this is only my theory because I can't tell you who actually has the codes because there's been a few different people claim to have the codes. But based off the information I have, I would say that the Bush family were the ones that end up with the ability to move the money between accounts. I might be wrong because I don't have hard evidence to say who ended up with the money. I can only have a look at, where the evidence is leading me and make a hunch, like any good detective. And so my hunch would be the Bush family in league with the Clintons and in league with those families that started the trafficking in the first place because they're the ones with the most to lose. And there's so much money. And I've heard about the White Spiritual Wonder Boy accounts, the White Spiritual Boy accounts. I believe they are those accounts. And there'll probably be certain people that are allowed a certain amount of access and they keep it very secret. And then those that learn about it are then put on the chasing rainbows, chasing the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Gold greed, gold fever. So they never actually talk publicly because they're all hush hush, we're about to get a lot of money. So it keeps the people on the peripheral chasing a shadow. And meanwhile, these very powerful people still get to keep the money. So that's all the information I have about that. And I think that's why it hasn't come on balance before. But I think really what we'd be able to do is use that money to cleverly, in the words of Werner von Braun, which is why I got into this in the first place, transform the permanent war economy into a peaceful space-age society. And obviously that's the modus operandi of Dr. Carol Rosen and myself, and the reason I spoke at the World Peace Congress. And we can't do that without resources that we control. And so wouldn't it be poetic justice if the very resources that enslaved modern humanity and led to genocide in Nicaragua and in other places of the world, including more recently Syria, were put towards rebuilding those cities, were put towards nurturing communities, were put towards empowering remote African villages with exotic sciences, which we know have been kept under lock and key in the military-industrial complex since, you know, at least the 50s or maybe earlier, from Nikola Tesla's diaries.
There's been some talk about negotiations for global reset of currency used for balance of trade payments and pegging currencies, and some arguing that some nations want to have a floating scale based on their GDP, some want it set equal, et cetera, et cetera. Is any of this particular issue related to these funds affecting that?
Sure, I would hesitate to say yes. I'm certainly not an economic expert. I've looked into the global reset a little bit. And the only thing I can say is that I'd make a hypothesis only because, as I said, I can only stand behind the documents that I have available, and the global reset hasn't come into the drop. But I see the same behavior of the global reset's going to happen, the global reset's going to happen, the global reset's going to happen, as the collateral accounts are going to be monetized. The collateral accounts are going to be monetized, and yet it never happens. So at least in my observation of the behavior of those presentations of the global reset and the collateral accounts, they appear to be running parallel with each other. So in that, I would make a connection that would need further follow-up and due diligence.
So whatever happened with, so Colonel Ferrara appears to be this man of mystery, and or General Ferrara appears to be this man of mystery. Is he still floating around out there?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. So Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara, they tried to assassinate him by using Marion Horn against him. The Colonel found out about this and told Marion Horn, who I do speak to. Marion Horn's a white hat. Last I know, Ferrara ended up as General Lorin William Rosier in a CIA safe house in Norway. But that was a couple of years ago, and he was 92 back then. So he may have died in the meantime. I don't know. I haven't followed up. It probably would be worthy to follow up if I can, but he's, you know, that path is very obscure, slightly dangerous to follow. So I've been waiting to get public traction on this first. However, one of the key points that you'll read in the FBI document is that Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara was pulled off the Patrice Lumumba situation in the Congo. Now, as we know, Patrice Lumumba was assassinated. And so we know then that Lieutenant Colonel Ferrara was involved somehow in the assassination, if indeed organising it, maybe directly in the assassination itself. We can't say specifically what role he took in the assassination, only that he was involved. Now, where that ties into my current story is that I've been put forward by the Foreign Ministry of the Democratic Republic of Congo as the designate honorary consul, which means it's not official yet, so it's still designate, but the documentation is there. And you will find that in folder 0 under my birth name of Peter Priest. All that documentation is 100% legitimate. I spent 4 months in the Democratic Republic of Congo last year. Now, when I look at what happened there, Patrice Lumumba was finally standing up after years of rule by Belgium and Leopold, and wanting to take back its independence as its own nation. And obviously the CIA didn't want that, and so they assassinated Patrice Lumumba, and they put in Mobutu, who turned it into Zaire, and made a lot of the deep state white people very, very, very rich, including himself and his family. That really destabilized the nation, and that led to one of the most heinous and life-taxing civil wars in modern history. It's actually regarded as Africa's World War. Laurent Kabila, President Joseph Kabila, the current president's father, came in and brought stability. He was a military leader, and that stability was seen. The CIA then assassinated Laurent Kabila, and then his son Joseph Kabila took the reins of Congo, and I've been over there. He's created considerable stability. And so I have recently stepped forward to ensure that the Congo knows who the assassin of Patrice Lumumba was, and I have been invited by the King of Suku, who is close friends with President Kabila, to be received to discuss this matter and to see what steps the Congo should take in relation to the matter. So this now is actually coming out at a state level, which is why this release with you guys, because of what's happening in the Congo soon, is very, very, very different to anything that's happened before. Because I have requested a meeting with President Kabila, and I have requested we get media around that meeting. And Julian Assange's father has intimated that that footage could be shared through the WikiLeaks platform, should I be able to ascertain it. So we're in a very interesting position now.
Yeah, I just noticed that yesterday, President Kabila, or not yesterday, earlier this month, he announced he is stepping down. And Moise is coming back and was at the border trying to get back into the DR Congo. I did do some research after we talked the other day prior to this interview, and I did find some CIA intelligence reports back during the time when Mobutu was still in power, and it almost looked like they were, you know, this. And there's two elements of the CIA. There's the dark shadow side, and there's the white side, right?
Yeah,
the good guy side. So it almost looked like this analysis report was that Mobutu needed to be replaced. They were supporting ADFL, the father of the current president, to come in there. There was even some questions as to whether or not the kids were born in Tanzania. Oh my God,
Tanzania.
Thank you, Tanzania, and
No
so on and
worries.
so forth. So it was very interesting to get to see what's going on there. But with him stepping down, where does that leave the country? And I see the Catholics all over this place. I see Rothschild's hands and Soros's hands all over this place.
Yeah, that's the problem. From what I know, and I may be wrong, I'll need to do some due diligence tomorrow. I think he's stepping down, but for re-election. So there will be a democratic election in November. So he has to step down, but to potentially be re-elected. But there is a term by which he has to serve. But my concern is simply this, is that the opposition is aligned with Rothschild. The opposition has big media interests, has a home in London, and I have heard certain intelligence in Congo that is legitimate, that where this opposition leader creates destabilization in a certain part of the community, and without the community knowing about it, he creates hardship for that community, and then he comes in with a solution to act like the good guy, and then he sparks unrest against Kabila, and then Kabila needs the army, obviously, to ensure that it doesn't spark out of control, which it can quickly do in Congo. And then the opposition can go, see, I told you so, Kabila's a bad guy. And he's not. He has created incredible stability in a very short time from a very heinous, horrible situation with not much funds, no taxation, and not a lot of help from the UN, who are just there to secure their own supply lines to cobalt, coltan, gold, diamonds, you name it. So I'll look into that a little bit more. All I know is that I trust the current presidency, and I need to get over there now to ensure that this information is given the inspection by the Congolese authorities that it requires.
Definitely a tense situation. I'm noticing that I'm going to call it a man-made, even though I have no proof of it, but I'm going to call it a man-made Ebola outbreak in the country now that they've gone in there and drawing attention to it. So I see this as Arab Spring, African style. 100%.
Look, Ebola was just recently cleared up, finally, in the top northwest of the country. And now, within days of it finally being cleared up, it appears in the Kivu province? No, I'm sorry. This is clearly foul play, clearly. You know, and the fact that the US government holds the patent on Ebola I mean, this is what they do. You know, Building 7 didn't collapse because of fire. So if they're capable of that, what else are they capable of?
Is there any chance they're trying to shut down the supply of industrial-grade diamonds to Russia and China?
Potentially, because Russia and China are the biggest buyers in that region of the diamonds. So, you know, it's potential. But at the same time, 80% of the world market for cobalt and coltan, which is the mobile phone industry, comes from Congo. So they have to be pretty careful. But there's definitely foul play going on, but it's not something that I can comment on in any great detail, as I don't have any firm documentation to, you know, to confirm it.
Appreciate it. Anybody else have some questions?
What time are you dropping that tomorrow?
So it'll be Friday evening. It's being dropped by another source. Be Friday evening, California time. So I don't think it'll be too late in the evening, maybe 6 or 7, something like that. California time on Friday.
One thing, and I don't know, I understand many different views as to what QAnon is represents. Let's just put it that way. Disinformation campaign, PSYOP, educational campaign, whatever you want to call it. Any chance that when this gets dropped, any posts on there that would validation by Q be supportive? I don't know that they're there yet in terms of getting the USA House in order. But this is definitely a case against the United States in terms of their part of the cabal's criminal activity. But this, what we're talking about here, is the worldwide cabal funding arm and funding mechanism.
Yeah, that's right. So the first part of your question is, would verification of Q be useful? I'm not so sure at this point, and I'm not so sure that they'd have the clearance to do it. From my information and the people that I speak to, I'm led to believe that Q is a small cell within the national security, the US NSA, National Security Agency. And, you know, they'll have their own orders working closely with the White House, I'm sure. It is a PSYOP, of course, because it is influencing people psychologically, but I think in a more positive way than we've seen in many, many years, because at least patriots are seeing hope, because information that's coming out from Q is later being proved true by the actions of President Donald Trump. So in many regards, I'm actually relying on President Donald Trump to be the man we all hope he will be. Otherwise, I think I'd be in pretty serious jeopardy myself, but I'm playing a chess game, and I certainly see that he's one of the white hat pieces due to how much he's been hated by the old US establishment, Hollywood, you know, and the sewer system of Los Angeles and the Clintons and all of the former Republicans. I don't think the hate for Donald Trump during the election was a psyop at all. I truly think that they didn't expect him to win. He played a very clever game and won. And now we're in a very beautiful position, which allows people like me to come forward pretty fearlessly and drop this intel and see what it does. And hopefully it does something significant, because I'm sick of, you know, it's a long battle, and I want it to come to an end myself. I want to get resolution around it so I can move forward into the next phase of my life.
Next question.
Any chance, can we talk about the 5-star trust funds, or not yet?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to say about them other than the $15 trillion that was swifted, three lots of $5 trillion, and another few $100 billion at one point, I think, from the Federal Reserve Bank to JP Morgan to RBS Global. That's the only funds I can confirm. Of course, we have heaps of account numbers for heaps of different funds, that amount to trillions and trillions of dollars. But without banking level clearance, I can't confirm those, which is why I'm trying to spark a Royal Commission of Inquiry or a congressional hearing into this so that we can afford the clearance to actually do a proper vetting and inspection of these account numbers. But what I can confirm is that that SWIFT did happen. So the way I always like to work is, well, why focus on the other stuff that we're not too sure about when we should focus on the one thing we're sure about? Because if we investigate that, it's like the breadcrumb trail that will link back to everything else, you know? What they're spending the funds on at the moment, I don't know, but they do enjoy some horrible and heinous parties. And we've all seen the news on YouTube. I don't even want to talk about it because, you know, I think this information needs to go out to young people as well. And some of the stuff we've been seeing coming out about the parties that these elite people enjoy, I think that they've just been having a big laugh at all of our expense and thinking that we would never find out about it, while spending, you know, so much money on their own debauchery and greed and narcissism. And potentially a secret space program. But outside of Gary McKinnon's hack of the NSA and the shipping logs, I'm certainly not prepared to talk too deeply about the secret space program, but clearly there is one.
So is there anything else you would want other people to know when they watch this video later? We had focused on some of the things that you thought were most important. Was there anything you wanted to add that you thought was also relevant to go down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, just, you know, make your own mind up about the documents. Let the evidence lead the investigation. I could sit here and say a million things, but what I'd prefer is just like the way that people who have followed Q have investigated stuff for themselves. Investigate that folder for yourselves. There's a lot in there. There's a lot of recordings. There's a lot of stuff to read. And so for people who want to learn more about this, take the time to do the due diligence. And then if you agree with it, share it with people. You know, that makes my job easier. That will help this to go where it needs to go. And if we can create enough traction around this, you know, this has the potential to engage at a level where we can start holding people accountable. We know off the basis of one document alone, just that FBI investigation that's been verified multiple times, we have enough information to hold the Bush family accountable for war crimes once and for all. You know, the ramifications of that in terms of bringing justice to the international relations around the world are staggering. And so let it begin, you know. I'm available to contact through different ways, and I'll look at the best way to go about doing that so people can reach me, but I don't want to be overwhelmed with communication either. So I'll put in place a way that can be handled in a good way so that I am accessible in a balanced way. And I'm the real deal. You know, I haven't done this for fun. I don't need fame. And I've been doing this off my own back for over 10 years now, and particularly in relationship to the 5-Star Trust. This has been, you know, I've been pulled out of my family business by 4 coppers and thrown in a hospital. The only reason was I was sending too many letters to the government. So they didn't want to charge me. They didn't want to afford me access to a court. And, you know, this has come at a great personal cost, and I've sacrificed a lot. I've got no reason to be making stuff up. So this is the real deal. And Insignia Gate can be something very special for all of us. It's not mine. It can be, you know, this is a message. And in, you know, Gary McKinnon, sorry, not Gary McKinnon, Gary Webb's great work, and the film, which is a great film, Shoot the Messenger. Let this be a redemption for his family. Let this be justice for Mr. Gary Webb's family, a crusader and a pioneer of this subject matter, And his books are obviously in that Dropbox as well, if anyone wants to read them. So Gary Webb came before me, and, off the back of this, I'm sure I'll be able to get Black Eagle, Colonel Marion Horn, and potentially Lord David James of Blackheath on the media with me. And that's what I'm looking at. Lord James one day said to me, "El, get me a smoking gun." And so this is a smoking gun. And it's time, ladies and gentlemen.
My only concern is that, one of the positive things about the way Q has approached it with the masses is with bite-sized chunks, how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. And with a large document dump, will you get the interest to be able to dive down in there? So I would, I don't know how it would be possible if there's like a key to the information or some sort of a indexing so that people can more easily digest it and understand the importance of it. Or you may want to consider doing lots of little videos, little vignettes to kind of whet people's appetite to dig.
Got it. Look, there is an index that's been written up, and it is in the drop folder along with the mandate. So that's fine. So there's a bit of a paragraph on each folder, which I think should be enough. And, people like what's popular, which is why I'm going over to Congo to hold a diplomatic mission. And I'll try and do all I can to get mainstream attention around that by having a discussion with President Kabila. And if that takes off, people are going to check it out anyway, because they'll know it's something important. And so I'm not relying on the drop by itself to do the job. I certainly won't rest on any laurels, and I'll keep powering forward as hard and fast as I possibly can, using whatever momentum comes from the drop as a way to leverage further success in the Congo with President Kabila. And of course, as I said, this information has the capability to leverage Julian Assange out of the Ecuadorian embassy, which is why I am in dialogue with WikiLeaks, and they certainly see this as a solid strategy moving forward. As much as they haven't officially endorsed it, it certainly is something that has the capacity to make change, should we be able to hit the right note. But as I said, we've got all the ingredients to the cake. We stick it in the oven. We don't know what it's going to look like when it comes out, but it's better than sitting on our hands and doing nothing at such a critical time in human history.
Amen to that.
I really appreciate you sharing all the information that you have with us today. Is there anybody else in the room that has questions for him? Because we are coming up on our hour mark. Any last minute words you would like to add to the video before we do our closeout?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I'm doing all of this for my family, for my wife, for my kids, for our kids. I one day decided that my back fence, my children's future and my responsibility for my kids didn't end at the back fence and at university. But I saw a world completely broken, and I knew as a thinking man and as a man that had had access to this information that I had a responsibility to my children. So to my kids, if they're out there at any point listening to this, I love them to bits. I love you to bits. And I'll keep fighting for the rest of my life to be a father away from you. And this is my way of showing you that I love you. And I have been inspired by a great spirit, by a great faith, a tremendous vision that I believe is a divine vision. I certainly believe in a beautiful spirit and a traditional and cultural inheritance for all people in a sovereign and protected way from malicious interests. And it's a peaceful vision that involves every single human being in the world, that we can all live and breathe and prosper and love and take care of each other without the narcissistic interests of a police state or a out-of-control tax body. So, look, I'm motivated by good things as a father. So if anyone wants to know what's driven me all this way, it certainly is the love for my kids, the love for my wife, and the love for my family to be a better man and to be a good example for all men. That's what I'm about. And if anyone says differently, they've never met Eliahi Priest.
So I want to say thank you again for sharing the information that you have, and looking forward to the future drops and getting the information that's out. So on behalf of the Patriot Rabbit Hole and L9 Productions, thank you for sharing your information.
Thank you so much for this platform. I really appreciate it, and we'll continue to walk forward one step at a time. Really appreciate your time, your questions, your due diligence, and I'm here for any future due diligence and questions that come through you guys that are required of me. I'll stand firm and stand behind what I've shared today. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys for getting involved and answering some of the questions. It's been very informative. There's a lot to absorb.
After the information drop, I'm sure we will love to do some digs into some of this information, see what we can do to push it out, and get people interested and involved, other YouTubers, to grab up the information as well.
Thank you so much.
So, all right, I think that concludes our video here for this point. So he can close it off for that side. And if there's anything you guys want to ask him directly that's not going to be recorded, now would be that time.
You there?
Hello.
Hi there.
I'm here. Howdy, hody, neighborhoody. Yeah, he's surprised. It was a funny matter. The accounts were released, but we're waiting on security protocols right now. And that's coming from the other side. So we're waiting for Vladimir to consign the letter. And once that goes into place, then I've been asked to actually activate the teams, and we've been given a green light on initiating a strike on a particular individual. His code name is White Cat. I told him that I was working with two teams, one DCI is familiar with, which is you, and another team, which is a MILAB unit.
Okay.
So I'm just going to leave it at that, because I know a lot is being left unsaid over digital channels, and we are propagating for a tabletop meeting for full rollout. Here's my concern right now. They have a strong emphasis in who they're working with, and I have a firm knowledge that there are only two funding sources. One is that of 41, and the operative who we've been given green light on, but they have no ability to access the capital. All they can do is move and show, so as to motivate people as if they have money but really not have access. And they know they have no access, but they're using it to con and manipulate world leaders right now. And then two is us and our ability to move capital.
Yeah. I think we're just pushing the inevitable anyway, because we know somebody has some cleanup. Those guys are just not going to go away. So
No, they're not.
Somebody either has to make them an offer that they can't refuse, or we're going to have a cleanup. And we're going to end up having to terminate somebody with prejudice to get their attention.
The guy I'm worried about right now is on a subject matter. Have you been updated or briefed on a man known as White Cat?
No. That's a new name to me.
This is one to be feared. This is one who's put several of my men 6 feet under, and he's also he's been known. He has no conscience. He's gone after their children. He's placed one of my mentors' child, 23-year-old, has nothing to do with this industry. Realigned his jaw and shattered it. Put him in a coma for 1 month. So this man has now been given a green light. Just to give you a level of who he is, he thinks that he is the G.
Is what?
So he thinks he's the general.
He does.
And
Okay.
he's not. Yeah, and he's not. He is not. He will not have that ability. He has played his hand too soon. The general is not dead. He is still alive. So what he's done is made irreparable and irreconcilable moves. And I'm told that when we get funding this week, that is the first mission I need to activate, is his extraction with prejudice.
Okay.